Okay, good afternoon, officially because it's 12:01. Hi, everybody. This is Gary Barnes, um, and I'm presenting the webinar today uh, called Working Together, Helping Any Troubled Employee Get Back on Track. I am a clinical social worker located in the beautiful community of Corvallis, Oregon, and have been uh, a uh, counselor and have had a long career in the employee assistance program world. Um, I've done a lot of coaching of supervisors and managers. I've done team building and a variety of other things. So I have a fair amount of knowledge. There obviously there's always more to learn, and so we're going to do this presentation. Um, I'll be the only one talking, which is always a little weird. It's nice to have conversations and feedback. So the way you can communicate with us is to ask questions using the question tab in GoToWebinar. Brenda Allen is with me, and she's like the technical guru and will be helping in a variety of ways. Do you want to say hi, Brenda?
Hi, Gary. Hi, everyone.
Okay. All right.
Thank you.
And Brenda's muted as well most of the time. And so just so you know, we will be sending you the presentation. Anyone who's registered will get the presentation after it's completed, and you'll also get a link to the audio version, my voice version of the presentation. And I think that's about it. Why don't we go ahead and get started? And we have 59 people on so far, and there may be a few people joining us who are a little late, but I think we should get started and reward people. I'm going to try to stop at about 10 minutes to the hour so that we can answer any questions that people have. All right, so Brenda, you want to advance the slide? Thank you, yeah. So, the idea here is that we rely on other people to get our work done, and I'm going to find out in a minute why you all are attending this. But our interest is in helping you work better as a team. And when you're supervising or managing people, you have an extra responsibility in that regard. Okay, next slide. So this is a polling question. We have two of these today. And maybe you know how this works. You'll have an opportunity to vote which one of these you think is most accurate. Are you here because you want to improve your skills as a supervisor or manager? Because you have specific concerns right now about how to manage an employee, or another reason? Somebody asked you to come, you love to learn, you're getting lunch paid for. I don't know what the reasons might be why you're attending, but if you could give us an answer, then that will give me a little bit of information about my audience. All right. Okay, so I forgot to mention that, and you probably just chose the one that you thought was the most appropriate, because you could have had all three, in fact. But so it looks like most of you just want to improve your skills. Some of you do have specific concerns about an employee, um, and some of you are here for other reasons. And I welcome all of you on board. I don't know where any of you are working, so the variety of workplaces could be just huge, which I think will make this even more interesting. Okay, let's go to the next slide, Brenda, please. Okay, Um, so here are our objectives today. I'll go through this really quickly. This time is going to fly, by the way. So we want to help you with situations where the personal and the professional collide. Um, we have jobs to do, we have missions, we have objectives, we may have things to sell, we have customers, but we're working with people, and all of us have our issues, and particularly during the pandemic, um, this has become just right front and center in our faces that we all have personal lives. It's become harder to hide them. I was telling Brenda when we were before we started the webinar, I said my dogs might start barking at some point. You know, those are the kinds of things that the minor things that we encounter with each other now. So we're going to talk about the risks of not addressing situations. We're going to talk about how to identify employees who may be struggling with something. We call it a troubled employee, and we'll talk about what we mean by that. Signs and symptoms, communication reminders, and strategies. We have a section on active listening, and then we even have a couple of scenarios for discussion at the end. We won't be able to get into your individual situations, but I'll give you information about how to reach us so that you can call us if you have individual situations that you want to talk to a professional about. Okay, next. So the experts say, and you don't have to be very expert to know this, we all have life events that distract us from work from time to time. And these are just a few of many, many examples. An ailing family member, divorce, death of a friend, substance abuse issues in the family or for an employee, financial problems. Um, one thing not on here are problems with children, which has become particularly prevalent during the pandemic. Kids who can't go to school and parents who are trying to work from home and deal with their kids at the same time. So the life events that distract us are phenomenal, and during the pandemic especially, it's common for people's energy to ebb and flow, for our motivation to ebb and flow, um, for our optimism to ebb and flow. So we can't expect people to be at their best at all times. What we're looking for when you're managing employees is the difference between when somebody is not at their best from time to time and when there seems to be a pattern of what we would call performance deficits. And we want to respond to those things differently. If somebody is starting to have increasing frequency of performance issues, and we'll talk about what we would call performance issues, then we want to address that situation differently. So the questions are, how can you support employees to be able to take care of themselves while also making sure they're doing their work? And how to handle this in a way that you could still be a leader to people and a role model. And then it's a fine line to be empathetic and also professional, and to keep your team productive. So how do we balance empathy, compassion, uh, giving people a break with holding people accountable for the work that they need to get done? Okay, next slide, please. So why should we address these concerning behaviors? Possibly you've seen statistics like this, and it's at some point just common sense, that people who have problems with their job performance will waste time, will often miss work. So here are some statistics that I'll read to you. Employees spend 2.8 hours per week dealing with conflict. 80% of workers feel stress on the job, and half say they need help learning how to manage stress and believe their coworkers need help. And one of the things I like to say here is that uh, for every employee that you have who has performance problems, that employee has coworkers who are trying to live with their coworker who has performance problems. I don't know if I said that clearly or not, but you're stressing out the rest of your workers if you're not dealing effectively and efficiently with an employee who's not getting the job done or who is causing conflicts in your work group. Missed work, here's just one statistic, and this is about depression. People with depression miss a fair amount of work. And there are people not just with a history of depression, but during the pandemic, there are people, who are having new episodes of depression, um, and having to miss work and having all of the other symptoms that go along with that. Substance abuse, we know affects um, uh, performance at work, and we also know that during the pandemic, the incidence of alcohol and drug abuse is increasing at the same time as the access to resources is decreasing. People aren't able to get to their 12-step meetings, to treatment programs. Um, there's a lot of people with sustained long-term recovery who are relapsing because of the pandemic. So substance abuse, you can expect, is a bigger issue, and we often don't see it directly at work. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. And of course, substance abusers are absent from work more. In fact, when I have consulted with supervisors and managers who are struggling with an employee, when I hear that employees just don't show up to work, that is a major red flag that somebody may be having substance abuse problems. Okay, next slide, please, Brenda. Okay, so of course, the troubled employees' difficulties can ripple through a workplace and cause reduction in work quality, and that's what I was talking about. It's not just the employee that's not getting their work done, they're also affecting their coworkers, and they're affecting possibly the morale, and can cause problems with questioning your leadership or management style, cause you to lose confidence in your own capabilities. And as this last bullet point says, the workplace just feels a little less safe when problems aren't addressed. It makes your employees feel like, as I like to say, there's not a grown-up in charge, or maybe they don't feel like there's anyone in charge, and that just raises everybody's anxiety level. Okay, next slide, please. Short list of common signs and symptoms that people are struggling. I think, and you could see these, I'll read these quickly: lateness, calling out of work, tearful, so all kinds of mood issues, irritable, angry, work quality, long lunches or leaving early, memory problems, trouble with concentration, learning, looking disheveled or decrease in hygiene. And of course, some of these things are easier to hide when they're working from home, working by Zoom or video, um, especially how people are looking. Now note that these things may not be a sign that people are struggling that much. For example, some people cry more easily than others, but this is a good sign. So when you see these things happening, and as I say, when you see a pattern of symptoms that look like these things, then you know you need to be paying attention. Also, your gut. Uh, you want to pay attention to your gut. You know, your gut may be telling you something's not right with an employee. You may not be able to articulate what it is, but we want you to trust your gut and look deeper for what really is going on. Okay, next slide, please, Brenda. So I start with this idea of universal job expectations. All of your employees obviously have um, specific job expectations, uh, like technical duties that they have to do. They have a job description, but these are what we call universal expectations. And I encourage you to use this list because when you can't articulate what's wrong with an employee, sometimes you have to look at this list. The quality of work, their dependability, their communication, their relationships, their judgment, organization, volume of work, and you notice the next one, job knowledge and technical skills, is one of however many there are on this list, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Of the 14, job knowledge and technical skills is only one. And as managers, historically, we often focus on job knowledge and technical skills as the one piece that we are supposed to be managing. So we have motivation, reaction to stress, problem solving ability, creativity, decisiveness, and hygiene. Okay, next slide, please. So where to begin? Be available. The idea is to start by being the best supervisor or manager that you can be. And by that, I emphasize building rapport. Uh, so you want to get to know your employees, develop trust. I was talking to an employee yesterday about a situation where the employees came forward to complain. They wrote a joint email to their managers, and without going into a lot of detail and or even giving away what the situation is. This is happening everywhere. Their job responsibilities had changed because of the pandemic, and people who have higher level job responsibilities were having to do um, physical labor to package things and get them out the door. And the reason I bring this story up is, first of all, it happened yesterday, so it's fresh in my mind. And secondly, what was glaringly obvious was the absence of management just saying, how are you doing? And, we recognize that the times are challenging and we want to be here to support you. They just weren't offering any emotional support. And so it was causing additional stress for everybody. And the employee I talked to acknowledged that if they just said, we're doing the best we can and we know that you're having a tough time, that would have made such a big difference. So this is where to begin, build rapport, get to know your people, check in with them, be a human yourself, give them a little bit of information, about yourself. I think good supervisors and managers have a good sense of boundaries, but even with good boundaries, it gives you a little bit of opportunity to talk about yourself and your life. Like earlier in this presentation, I told you my dogs might be barking. I mean, those are the kind of things that are not, I'm not telling all of you about my personal problems, but I'm telling you, a little bit about me and my life, and then you start to feel more comfortable wanting to tell me about your issues. So that's what we want. We want your people to feel comfortable coming to you and talking to you about whatever is going on. For example, as it says on this slide, that their parent is gravely ill, or they're stressed out because of a relationship. We want them to tell you those things because their performance will dip during that time, and then you can, make a plan with them. Okay, I think that's enough. Let's go on to the next slide, please. So you saw on that last slide, you want to develop an attitude of compassion, empathy, and those are different, by the way. I think of empathy as being able to emotionally relate to what somebody's going through. The problem with empathy is that sometimes you can get yourself in too deep. So I like to use the word compassion because if you think of compassion, compassion is when you can shift to thinking about the other person and what's going on for them. And in compassion, you're really able to offer an attitude of how can I help? How can I help is compassion. It requires empathy. In other words, you have to have the ability to understand what a person's feeling or might be going through. But in compassion, you're able to set a little bit of a boundary. So you're not making it about you, you're making it about them. Okay, so if you've noticed behaviors that indicate that somebody might be struggling, here's a way to begin. Schedule a private meeting. And this, you don't have to make a big deal of this, but you don't want to talk to somebody in front of other people. And then you want to really try to listen. I noticed whatever you noticed, how are you doing? And then try to listen if you can. One of the hardest things to do, right? I'm sure many of you are nodding. They may just want a sounding board. Um, and if they need some kind of help, give it a chance to come out. Also, you don't want to offer something that you might not be able to deliver on, and we'll talk about, I think that comes up in a slide coming up. And using the word we, I think if you're representing the organization especially, how can we support you is good. I think, like I said, the attitude is how can I help? Is the way to go. And the employee may want to ask for something, or there may not be anything that needs to happen yet in the early stages. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so here's another polling question for you all to answer, and this will set the stage for the rest of this training. So an employee who is having performance problems will be most motivated by which? So select which ones you think apply here. Strong reprimands and discipline, verbal support for effort that's aligned with desired outcomes, and unconditional acceptance of the employee. So we'll give you a little bit of time to respond. All right. Excellent. I did sort of throw a softball at you here, and I'm glad you all saw it. Um, so it's really, this is super important, and this will affect everything we talk about in the rest of this presentation. Um, there is research, by the way, that supports the idea that when you are hard on yourself or hard on other people, when you're judgmental, um, that or get angry at people, lash out, um, that their motivation decreases. So there's a famous, to me it's famous study where they took a bunch of dieters who agreed to participate in the study, and they asked the dieters to eat a donut. Um, and then they made them drink a large glass of water as well. So the combination of the water and the donut made these dieters obviously feel like they were not following their diet. So then they broke the group into two groups, and in one group they gave them a letter that offered support, that told them that people break their diet from time to time. It's okay if you get off track. You'll get back on track with just a little bit of effort. The other group they didn't do anything with. And then they asked these two groups to eat a bunch of candy. So they sat them in front of a bunch of candy, and the experiment pretended to tell the participants that they were supposed to sample candy. They could eat as much as they wanted, um, but they just needed to write down what they thought of the candy they sampled. Now, the participants didn't know that the amount of candy they ate was being weighed. So which group do you think ate more candy of the dieters, right? These are dieters. Well, the people who got the letter saying that it's okay to break your diet from time to time ate less candy than the group that didn't get anything. Um, and there are other studies like this that sort of show that motivation comes from within. People want to do a good job. And so they don't need to be told, and you don't need to tell yourself that you're bad when you're not following through on things. So let's go to the next slide, please, Brenda. So keep that in mind. The idea here is you always want to be soft on the employee, soft with your language, supportive with your language. Now you may need to be firm with your expectations, firm on holding people to agreements that you made, but there is never a reason to not be kind and compassionate with your language. Okay, so in this slide we talk about you saw there were three options on the quiz we gave you, and the third one was employees, it's good to just give unconditional support at all times. This doesn't help employees either. Um, uh, and what this slide talks about is you don't want to get so caught up in employees' personal issues that you become their confidant or their counselors. And hopefully all of you have an employee assistance program available. And so this is where the employee assistance program can come in. When an employee starts to talk a lot about their personal life, your job is to listen, not ask too many questions. Um, again, ask what you can do to help. How can I help? And then remind them that of resources that they have available. Let's go to the next slide. I think I got a slide ahead on, right. So know what you can offer, and uh, wait to find out sometimes. Um, there's no reason why, in most cases, you have time to think about an action plan. So when an employee starts to tell you about problems that they have going on, usually you don't have to take any action at that moment. It's okay to say, okay, let's think about, options that we have available. And then, I'd like to get back and meet with you again, in a little while. And that gives you time to step back and think about how I want to act. Most things do not require an immediate response. And most of us are not great at thinking on our feet about how to respond to somebody, especially when there's emotions involved. So if an employee's laying a lot of stuff on you, the capacity to pause, hit the pause button and step back and take time to make a plan can make all the difference in terms of how you respond. So in this slide, it talks about understanding your company's policies and restrictions on short and long-term leave, knowing what resources you have, like the Employee Assistance Program, how to get a hold of the Employee Assistance Program, involving human resources. If there is any possibility that there might need to be disciplinary action down the road, make sure you consult with human resources. If there is the possibility of needing family or medical leave, totally human resources are the experts in those things as well. You can consult with your manager, you can consult with human resources, you can consult with the Employee Assistance Program. So in today's world, for most of us, there's little reason why you have to deal with these situations alone. And fortunately, for most of you, you don't deal with these situations all that frequently, so you don't become an expert at dealing with it. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so when you have employees with performance problems, remember that less than 10% of coworkers have chronic performance issues. This is one way of saying what I just said a few minutes ago, that you don't ever get good at it. So some of you in the beginning said that you did have an employee you were struggling with right now, and that may be true. Some of you may not have any employees that you're having problems with right now. There are some jobs where people have employees that they're supervising, have several. There are lines of work where that happens, but it's probably more common that the employees that you're struggling with are the exception. So that's really interesting, because your style of management will work well with hopefully with almost everyone. And the employees that you're going to struggle with are a minority, and you may have less skill at dealing with those. Now, people become difficult because of problems in their life outside of work, or sometimes because of a fixed trait. And if they're having problems in their life outside of work, they may or may not tell you. If I, if my child scored the winning goal in a soccer game last night, I may come to work today and be telling all of my coworkers about how cool my child is for scoring that winning goal. If I had a big fight with my wife last night, and even worse, if we were drinking too much when we were having the fight, there's a pretty good chance I'm not going to come to work telling anybody about what happened. So the more serious the problems, the more ashamed we are of our problems, the less likely we are to talk about them at work. So the problems may show up in performance problems, in fact, they probably will show up in performance problems and not, and without you as the supervisor or manager really knowing what's actually going on. And then there's a question here, what other reasons do you think employees might have performance problems? And one of the things, of course, are the issues at work. And I think we have that slide coming up. I know it is in here, so I'll go. Let's go to the next slide, Brendan. I think if I manage this right, it should be coming up soon. Okay, so whether you've settled on a solution yet or not, meaning, and what I would say by solution, I would say a course of action. You want to check in with employees occasionally and privately. Now, what I've learned over the years is that when you're struggling with an employee and their performance, and I wish I could get a raising of hands from all of you here, um, the common thing that we do is we tend to avoid the employees that we're having trouble with. Often it's because they're defensive, because we're always delivering bad news. You start to feel like you're being more of a parent than a coworker, and especially if you're dealing with an older employee and you're feeling like you're having to act like a parent with them by telling them they're not doing their work right. There's a variety of reasons why our natural instinct is to avoid the employee. And what we're saying here is actually the opposite is better. The idea is to get closer to that employee, check in regularly, and have more casual conversations, at least in the early stages of a problem. Um, and just ask these simple questions. How you doing? Um, or do you feel like you got a handle on things? How's your day going? Um, make sure you come to me if you need anything, things like that. Okay, I would say, I'll say it here, I'm forgetting the order of the slides, that as you develop more and more problems with an employee, a specific employee, and you've made several efforts to correct the problem, what I like to say is you want to become more formal. So your meetings with them may actually be more scheduled. You may have an agenda. You want to become less haphazard because you don't want to let things slip out of your mouth that the employee then tries to use against you, um, or goes to their union or HR about. So as that relationship becomes more tense, you want to become a little more formal. But remember what I said about always being soft in your language. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about being more intentional in the way that you approach the employee. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so here's the slide I was hoping to get to one slide earlier. So when we were asking what are some of the reasons why an employee might not be performing well, if it is a skill problem, a knowledge problem, a resource or tool problem, or an experience problem, then you can help them with any of those things, right? If it's a skill deficit, you can possibly send them to training or assign them to work with a coworker to learn something. If it's a knowledge deficit, again, you can send them to training, you can give them information. If it's a resource or tool deficit, you can try to address that with them. And of course, if it's an experience problem, then you can find ways to give people experience or reassign um, certain tasks to people who do have the experience needed. Okay, the next slide, please. But when those things are ruled out, then there's a high likelihood that the problems going on with the employee are actually these underlying personal problems. And we just made a partial list here. Relationship issues are always the number one reason why people come to the employee assistance program, by the way. Relationship and family issues are a close second. So while depression, anxiety are super common, substance abuse, um, death and dying issues, legal financial problems, uh, relationship issues and family issues, parenting issues usually lead the way. And employees may not want to talk to you about them. Or employees will talk to you about some of their problems, but they won't tell you, um, that they're also drinking too much. Substance abuse, by the way, is one of the most common problems that people hide because of shame. And substance abusers become experts in hiding that particular problem. Okay, next slide. Right. So if it is a personal problem, then guess what? You're not going to be able to probably be in the best position to help them. We're talking physician, therapist, counselor, whatever, psychologist, attorney, or the employee assistance program, which it doesn't have physicians, but the employee assistance program does have counselors, legal and financial assistance. So you as a supervisor, you're neither a friend or a counselor. I like to joke with anyone who will listen that my main strength as a counselor with my clients is that I don't know them, I don't live with them, I'm not their friend, and I certainly don't supervise them or work with them. So I have a unique role with my clients, and so many of you out there have a lot of wisdom and so much that you could offer to people. But when it's somebody who works for you, you really have to hold back uh, because that's not the role that you're playing. So the idea here is everybody has to know the role that they have and play that role. And your role is to be their supervisor, hold them accountable for job performance, find ways to help motivate them to get back on track, help them identify resources that they can use if they need it. And if you do your role well, it's invaluable because if I'm married to somebody who's got a drinking problem and I know they're coming to work and they're screwing up at work, me being married to them, I can't I don't have a lot of power. All I could do is, yell at them, threaten to leave them or whatever. But you as their boss, if you're holding them accountable for job performance, that might be the impetus that gets that person to get help. And that's what they need is help. And as their spouse, I may or may not have much power in getting that person help. So bosses often have a lot of power in helping employees to see that they need help. Okay, next slide, please. You could tell I was passionate about that one. Okay, so here are some reminders about how to communicate. Like I said, always being soft. Be empathetic, be kind, be willing to get involved and advocate for your employee if necessary. Outline expectations and get agreement on those. Set time, a timetable, schedule follow-ups or check-ins. And usually these are not a follow-up or check-ins, these are multiple mini interventions that we're doing. Document your conversations, date and time, and a little bit about what happened. This doesn't have to be formal, but you want documentation for your memory. And down the road, you might need dates and times and what was agreed upon. Always highlighting positives. By the way, highlighting positives is one of the reasons to meet more frequently with an employee who's not doing well. Because if you, like, let's say you schedule weekly meetings with an employee who's not doing well, you may have a weekly meeting where you're able to say, wow, you did well in this and this and this week. If you wait until they screw up and you're only meeting with an employee when they screw up, then every meeting is going to have a negative tone to it. So you want to be prepared for big feelings and your reactions to those. You want to try to focus on listening, which is one of the hardest skills, like we said. And then, of course, you want to maintain confidentiality. Privacy is so important. Okay, next slide, please. Barriers to progress. Um, so after following through, we have these grand interventions, like you get your ducks in a row and you have an employee come in and you meet with them and you're sure, now they're going to get back on track. Well, it doesn't always work that way. And then, the employees are often defensive, or if they're really skilled at being defensive, you don't know they're being defensive. They nod their head, say, oh, yes, I'll get better, things will get better, but then they don't. And then, like we said, the human nature is that because it's uncomfortable, you avoid following up with them. Um, and then this is a very common pattern, and we don't have great ways to deal with this, and that is the third bullet. Performance improves in the short term, but returns to problem behavior patterns. Uh, these are the hardest employees to manage. Employees who, are chronically falling short of expectations, but never falling short enough that you can take strong action to move them along. So, you sort of do the best you can with employees in that situation. Okay, next slide, please. What to avoid? Don't avoid the problem. And this is all of us, this is human, to try to avoid dealing with things that are hard, that we don't know what to do with, that are not clear cut, where the other person is going to get defensive, right? Also, don't diagnose or give medical advice or suggestions. This is huge. Do not give medical advice or suggestions. Um, this may be your normal supervising strategy or style, and you can get away with this with employees um, in a casual way. But once you've identified with an employee who you're going to have a tougher time with, that's where you really want to tighten up and not try to tell them what worked in your marriage. Or I've heard stories where supervisors tried to get employees to go to their church or to read a verse in the Bible, or why don't you call my counselor, they're really helpful. These are all well-intentioned things that we do, but they're very much off track. Okay, don't cover up. Don't ask too many why questions. Don't encourage too much personal information. What I would say to you there is, so if you say, like, if you're like inquiring with an employee, so what's going on at home? What's really happening there? And they say, oh, what if they really tell you? Oh, you wouldn't believe it. My wife and I got into this fight last night, and then they tell you the whole story. Think about it. How is it going to help you? Um, if you have that many details to supervise them, it's just going to make it more mucky, really. So, if you think about it, you really don't want to know a lot of details. And this is another human nature thing. We love details, right? We're all closet voyeurs. We want to know what's going on with people. We also just like to know what's going on. So, you know, this isn't easy to do. So you want to try to train yourself to not, before you meet with an employee, try not to ask too much about what's going on. Okay, don't try to solve problems, don't make value judgments, and don't be misled by their anger, defensiveness, or denial. And this is where the pause button really helps. Okay, let's go on. I can see I'm being verbose. Active listening is a set of skills you can use every day. Um, and it's basically restating what somebody's saying and using validation. Uh, it's a way of staying involved in a conversation. Also, nonverbals can be a way of active listening, nodding, etc. Let's move on to the next slide. I'm going to go through this next section pretty quickly. Um, Trying to pause can help slow down the difficult conversation um, and slow things down in a good way. Your body language can help and asking relevant questions. Let's go on. So do set a tone of compassion, do be creative with solutions, and do check in. Next slide, please. Don't act like a therapist. Don't make promises you can't keep. And don't treat similar situations among all employees the same. Um, you want to try to be. We talk about equity rather than fairness, and that's where having um, following your organizational policies can be really helpful. An employee might say you're not treating them fairly, but if you're treating them in a similar way by the same rules that you're treating everyone else, um, you know, you're doing a better job. Okay, next. All right, so let's see. We're going to run out of time. We'll go through these quickly. So a senior HR executive who managed 2 women through intensely stressful months of fertility treatments. In both cases, treatments continued for more than a year, so the women were away from work frequently for medical appointments and procedures. How did they make it work? Um, so the challenges here are that fertility treatments don't fit neatly into any existing standard HR leave policies, so they had to use sick time, flex time, and personal days. Human resources worked to help each woman set concrete, realistic work goals that allowed them to focus on the most critical deliverables. The team was well prepared to cover the maternity leaves, and each woman had many successful years at the company. So this is a way that that by knowing what was going on, setting realistic goals, delegating some of the responsibilities, there was a good success. Let's go to the next scenario. And there are a lot of aspects to that scenario that made it work. Knowing what was going on and being able to develop a plan with people who were cooperative. All right, in this case, a husband of a female employee diagnosed with brain cancer. Management recognized it would be a long and emotional roller coaster. So how could they best support her? They offered flexibility. Her job was restructured so that she had duties that weren't as time sensitive. They shifted her duties to give the team less reliance on her. She agreed to switch her compensation from salary to hourly. And after a year of diagnosis, she's still with the company. So these 2 scenarios are showing you ways by using your creativity that you can help employees deal with some of their personal issues. Okay, next slide, please. I think that's it. Yeah, so that's it. Let's try to tackle questions with the last 4 minutes that we have. Let's see if we have any. Please put your questions in now. Brenda, I think I might need your help here reading the question.
Okay, yeah. So we do have a question here. In regards to spending time with the trouble employee and giving them attention, I have found that this often takes attention away from those employees who are doing well. So how do you recommend balancing that?
Yeah, it's a lot like parenting, right? I mean, the child who's misbehaving gets all of the attention. I don't think there's a magic answer to that. I think it really is about intention, being intentional. I love the word, by the way, intentional. And so, what are some ways you could be intentional? You could start your day by, or your week, by putting into your calendar 15-minute slots, or 10-minute slots, or 5-minute slots. And you go and you meet with the employees who are doing well, who are not the one you're having trouble with, and intentionally give them some time. How are they doing? Um, I just gave like I just made all that up. I mean, it could be you give every employee 10 minutes every week or 15 minutes every week. It could be that you just go to their desk. But my point is that I think it requires intention. In the same way that um, you have a big project that you're managing and you've got people bombarding you with a need for attention, you have to carve time out of your schedule to sit down and work on that big project. It's sort of the same thing. You have to organize your time in a way where you can make the employees who are doing well more of a priority. And you really want to let them know that they're doing well. As I like to say, you want to give feedback when employees are not doing well, obviously, but you also want to give them feedback when they are doing well. And the more specific the feedback, like I really like the way you showed up at that meeting, or the way you did that project, or the way you responded to that client, the more specific, the better. Okay.
Okay,
Any
great.
other?
Thanks. Yeah, we have time for one more question. So we're wondering, do you have any leadership books or websites that you would recommend?
Yes. Some of my favorites. There's so many out there, by the way. Um, I really like Crucial Conversations and the follow-up book, Crucial Confrontations, and it's a whole model, and there are trainers out there, and you can go do an online training on it, or you can just read the books. Um, but they talk about how to deal with these very difficult conversations. The idea of a crucial conversation is one that has to happen, but there's likely to be conflict or difficulty in having it. I also have been partial to a guy named Patrick Lencioni, who wrote a book called The Five Dysfunctions of a Team. Um, I like his books because they're written in parables, so they're really easy to read. There's stories about managers and how they deal with things. So I think those are two good recommendations. I think did we have other? Oh, there are a couple at the end of this presentation that they have that are here as well. So good question. I hope you find some other ones as well. Anything else? Any other pressing questions, Brenda? I know we're at the end of our time.
Yeah, we do have one final question if you have time.
Yeah, I have
But,
time. If people need to
okay.
check out, that's fine. But
Okay. Any strategies for working with young employees with different work expectations than older staff?
ah, oh, I'm not really prepared for that answer. There are. That's a whole nother training topic, and it's fascinating. Um, Millennials and younger um, do have very different approaches to their work, and yeah, I don't really have any specific suggestions other than I think you should you know go learn about it, read a book about it, take a class on it. Um, I think what I have learned is that younger people, while they do appear to have a different work ethic, I don't think it's really that simple. They are more interested in balancing home and work, which personally I think is fantastic. Millennials want to be more involved in parenting. They are more likely to have an equal share in housework, things like that. So they and they want more flexibility in their job. But just like any employee, if you can let them know their value and if you can help them structure their job in a more flexible way and listen and have more give and take, I think there's a potential you'll have them eating out of your hand. And I don't think their work ethic is any different than any of us. Remember the donut story. I mean, I think humans inherently want to do good work, want to work hard, want to get things done, want to be successful. So I think they're just coming at it in a different way. And it's important not to judge younger people for appearing to not be as interested in work as we are, us older people, and I'll include me in that, who feel like we have to put in a 10-hour day or we haven't earned our keep. Um, so I'll leave it at that. But great question, and hopefully IBH, RBH will be doing a class on that at some point. Okay. Were there any other questions, Brenda?
It looks like that's actually all the questions we have for this afternoon. So thank you very much for presenting today, Gary. That was great.
Yes, if anybody has anything else, feel free to just let us know, and Brenda will get me any questions that anybody else has. And thank you all for attending. I hope if you got one thing out of this that you remember in a week, I'll feel like we had a success. So thank you all for attending, and I'll look forward to interacting with you in the future. Okay, bye-bye.